I am no longer in control of my own body. Everybody in Silence Creep knew about the old trail through the abandoned cemetery, but only a few were brave enough to actually use it. Margaret Ferrer shouldn't have been there on that cloudy day, but her car had broken down at the worst time and at the absolute worst place. Margaret made her way along the unkempt path, trying to call Pete's tow truck and her daughter Mary. Distracted by her phone, Margaret slipped on the path and fell over. Her phone fell into a nearby thicket. Margaret licked her scraped finger and started fumbling around the thicket, looking for her phone. But instead of her phone, she touched a tombstone. The tombstone was already scary enough, covered in moss and old vines, but the inscription on it made a chill run down Margaret's spine. The inscription read, "Here lies Lily Gray, victim of the 666 beast." Mrs. Ferrer went back home with a terrible headache. Mary had already made dinner for her sister and herself, and Pete had promised to pick up the car tomorrow morning, so Margaret could relax a little. She filled the bathtub and let herself enjoy the sweet, aromatic scent of the bath oil. That will do the trick for her migraine. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she saw the tombstone that she had uncovered earlier that day. Her head began to ache even more painfully than before. Margaret dug her fingers into her hair and gritted her teeth. The silence was suddenly broken by the sound of hundreds of whispering voices. The voices merged into one, forming a single word. "Beware!" "Who's there?" she yelled. The whispers only dug deeper into her mind. "The beast will appear on your doorstep at midnight. It will take your children." Her head spun. Bile rose in her throat. Margaret felt as if she might lose consciousness. The last thing she saw was Mary's scared face through the soapy water. Margaret woke up in her bed. It was dark in her room. Voices could be heard from behind the door. One of the voices was Mary's. The others was Rosie's. And the third? Wait, what was a man doing in their house in the middle of the night? Margaret shakily got out of bed and headed for the hallway. The door opened just as she was reaching for the handle. She saw a tall, male figure. Margaret squinted to try to make out the nighttime visitor and almost fell over again. Adam Hall, the sheriff of Silence Creep, steadied her and helped her to the couch. "You've fainted in the bathtub. Are you okay?" asked the sheriff. Noticing his old friend's incredulous look, he added, "Mary called me." Margaret tried to answer, but it was as if her mouth was full of something sticky. She couldn't find the right words to respond. Adam bent over to look at her face. He seemed very worried. "Why don't I watch over the girls until you feel better?" Margaret gathered her thought and responded that she could take care of her girls herself. Adam left, promising to pop in tomorrow. Margaret felt relieved. Something about the sheriff's visit had made her feel on edge. She put the girls to bed and went back to her room. Once she was alone again, the strange whispers returned. "The beast will take them. Don't let the beast take them." A woman's voice whispered insistently. Margaret covered her ears to block out the sound, and it stopped for a moment. But when she looked up, she saw the same words written into the mirror and windows in her room. Margaret closed her eyes. "This is all wrong. This isn't happening." Margaret screamed, not from fear, but from a sudden pain. She felt as if a sharp object had been driven into her body. She opened her eyes and saw dark stains on her nightgown. Someone was carving the words into her. "The beast will come at midnight." Margaret clutched her cross and huddled into the corner. She remained there until morning. In the morning, instead of taking Mary and Rosie to school, Margaret hid them in the basement. She was going to protect her children from whatever might try to take them. The words that had been carved into her skin were really painful and had started to itch. Margaret held her wounded arm under the tap and jumped back in horror when she saw a swarm of worms all over them. Instead of her reflection in the mirror, she saw a bluish woman in a dirty shroud. Her wounds stung even more, and the whispers filled her head once again. Margaret jumped into the car and headed to the pharmacy. The line parted when she saw the shaking woman with the matted hair and a face grimacing in pain. No one recognized her as the smiling Margaret Ferrer. "Give me something that will make them shut up!" Margaret demanded from the pharmacist. "Make who shut up?" quietly asked the person behind her. Margaret turned around. She was standing in front of a tall man with bright eyes. Margaret grunted that it wasn't his business. The man gently touched her hand, lifting her sleeve to reveal the inscription. "I think you need help, miss," he said discreetly. "I'm Reverend Lewis. I'm the new priest." He led Margaret outside, sat her down on a bench, and asked her to tell him what happened. Margaret was afraid he wouldn't believe her, but the priest's soothing tones calmed her. So she told him about the voices, her headache, and the inscriptions. "There is a reason for all of this, Margaret," said Lewis seriously. "You've disturbed someone's vengeful spirit. Do you remember how it all started?" Margaret was silent for a while. Then she told the priest about how she had fallen onto a tombstone in the old cemetery and hurt her finger. The priest's face suddenly looked very concerned. "Your blood has disturbed an evil spirit. The spirit seems to be quite strong. We need to wait for it to start whispering about the beast again, and then perform an exorcism. I will come to your house tonight. Until then, you have to cover all the mirrors in your house and hide your children. Also, be careful. The beast might come in the guise of someone you know." After parting with the priest, Margaret got in the car to head home. After their conversation, her tremor had slightly died down. Now she just had to wait for nightfall. Margaret suddenly saw an evil, deformed woman's face in the rear-view mirror. The ghost smiled widely. She opened her black mouth and started to whisper. Margaret tore the scarf from her neck and wrapped it around the mirror, like the priest had told her to do. But her relief was suddenly interrupted when she noticed another oddity: Sheriff Adam Hall's car following her discreetly. Adam parked at Margaret's house and intercepted her at the door. "You don't look so great. What happened?" he asked. "Why did you come here?" The sheriff replied that he was worried when he heard that Mary and Rosie hadn't come to school. Margaret tried to avoid his questions, but the sheriff made it clear that he wasn't leaving without an explanation. So Margaret told the sheriff the same story as she had just told the priest. Adam thought for a moment, then wrote down the location of the tombstone and the inscription on it, and promised to figure it out. "It's okay. Reverend Lewis, the new priest, is going to help me." The first thing Margaret did was cover all the mirrors with bed sheets. Once nightfall came, the voices began to whisper from behind them. A woman peeked out from under the sheet, as her ghost had come out from the mirror and was watching Margaret. The girls could be heard crying quietly from the basement. Reverend Lewis arrived exactly at midnight. He lit a candle and held it in his hand as he walked around the house, quietly murmuring something. The entire house was filled with smoke. Margaret's head started spinning. "I see," said the priest. "She wants to possess your body." Louis asked Margaret to stay in the center of the room while he walked around her with the candle. The lights in the house flickered. Margaret felt weightless. She opened her eyes and saw that she was hovering right underneath the ceiling. Tears poured from her eyes. Her mouth felt thick and sticky again. She couldn't even let out a scream. A knock on the door could be heard from somewhere below. It was loud and persistent. The priest lifted his head and quietly said, "The beast has arrived." Margaret could no longer feel her body. She could only feel the sharp pain and almost hysterical fear. She felt as if her bones were twisting out of her body. A woman's pale, unnatural face hung in front of her. Margaret could feel her consciousness gradually fading out. Suddenly, a familiar voice brought her back to her senses. "Margaret, open up!" It was Adam Hall. Margaret turned her head to the door and realized that she was lying on the floor. She couldn't see the priest, but she could still hear his voice, telling her that the beast was at her doorstep, and she shouldn't let it in. You're in danger! Let me in!" The sheriff continued to pound on the door. Margaret became shrouded in darkness, and she realized that she was going somewhere. She was up and walking on her feet, holding something heavy and shiny in her hands. "Do this, Margaret, and be free," said the priest gently. With great effort, Margaret forced herself to look around. She could see that she was walking towards the basement door, towards her children. She was holding a large kitchen knife. Margaret screamed in her head, tears uncontrollably running down her face. Her body wouldn't listen, and she continued to approach the basement door. The priest's face appeared in front of her. His soft features were suddenly harsh and unpleasant. His eyes were darker than the night sky. At that moment, Margaret realized the simple but terrifying truth. When the priest had promised to come to her house, he hadn't asked for her address. Now it was too late. Now her body was under the control of some creature of darkness. It was leading Margaret to her children to do something terrible. There was a crash in the hallway. Margaret couldn't turn her head, but she heard the sheriff's voice. He had broken the door down and was yelling at Margaret to stop. She really wanted to stop, but instead she pounded on the basement door where Rosie and Mary were crying in fear. The priest's voice continuously repeated that her liberation was near. Sheriff Adam Hall reached for his weapon, and all he saw was a crazed woman trying to hurt her own children. "Put down the knife!" demanded the sheriff. "You don't understand. The priest is controlling me," Margaret managed to scream. "There isn't a Reverend Lewis. I checked. It's only me and you here." The knife fell out of Margaret's hands. She could move again. But instead of relief, all she could feel was terror. If the priest didn't exist, did that mean she had lost her mind? She turned around and walked towards Adam. The sheriff put down his gun and reached out his hand to Margaret, when he suddenly noticed the horror in her eyes. Then there was only a dull pain and darkness. Margaret saw the priest appear from behind Adam's back. His eyes had gone completely crazed. He lifted up a lamp and hit Adam on the head. The sheriff fell on the floor, unconscious. The priest grinned at Margaret and told her to go to the basement and finish what she'd started. She couldn't control her body again, but she managed to let out one question. "Who are you?" Lewis laughed and said that he was the follower of a great occultist, and although the occult had perished long ago, he continued to carry out its work. There was nothing scarier than a mother who would sacrifice her own children. This is the type of offering he needed to achieve immortality. Margaret was just one of many, but when she asked about Lily Gray, the woman whose grave she had stumbled upon, Lewis's face darkened. She managed to resist our master, but she paid for it with her life. And then Margaret realized that the whispers and the woman in the mirror wasn't the work of an evil being. It was Lily Gray's spirit trying to warn her about the monster that would come to her house at midnight. Margaret realized what she had to do. While Lewis continued to speak, Margaret crawled towards the center of the room and pulled the sheet off of the mirror. Lewis noticed too late. Now the woman's malicious face stared at him from every reflective surface. Lily wanted revenge. Suddenly, her body ripped out of the mirror and pounced on Lewis as he tried to run out of the door. There was a flash of light and a scream, and Lewis's body distorted into a shapeless shadow. Lily Gray's face slowly faded into the early morning light. Margaret opened the basement door and hugged her daughters. The sheriff groaned, slowly regaining consciousness. Margaret called for help and brought him some water. Adam rubbed his bruised head and picked up his walkie-talkie. His face turned pale. No sooner had he recovered from one strange event when another was taking place somewhere else in the city. "I'll be there soon," said Adam, getting to his feet.